Hello in the first chapter of my course about London system. In the first lecture I would like to show you some free illustrative games in that system. The first will be between Hikaru Nakamura and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, played in 2015. Okay, so let's start. Of course, after knight f6, bishop f4, this is obviously the London system. Here Vachier-Lagrave tried quite a rare move, this is move b6, but this is of course some kind of Queen's Indian, and this is fully playable. Nakamura responded with move c4, bishop b7, knight c3, e6 and a3. This is of course not the main line and not the most popular move, but this is certainly very useful to cover the b4 square. So this is why the move a3 is very useful. d5, e3, just protect the c4 pawn, so we can just regain it with the move bishop c4. Of course not immediately, because after dc4, bishop c4, g2 pawn would be hanging. But after knight f3 it is quite easy to regain that pawn on c4. Bishop d6. MVL wants to exchange this dark squared bishops, and Nakamura doesn't want to do so, and he's playing bishop g5. Even losing a tempo in such position is not a big deal, because still when you have more pieces on the board and you have some spatial advantage, and there is some slight spatial advantage for white, it is good to not exchange too many pieces. So this is why I like the move bishop g5. h6, and here quite an interesting choice. Nakamura decided just to take on f6, and after queen f6, cd5. ed5, this is very typical structure for some kind of Queen's Indian, and this is certainly the position in which white can hope for some slight edge. Queen a4, very useful move to disrupt black's development. King f8. Although this is not a mistake, I do not like this move. I think that more natural was to play, for example, bishop c6. After queen b3, or bishop b5, then bishop b5, queen b5, c6, queen d3. Castles, knight f3, knight d7, castles, and of course this position is equal, and black doesn't have any bigger troubles here. So this is why I prefer more the move bishop c6. Even after queen b3, castles, this is of course a very interesting idea. Bishop d3, this is the move which white has to play. Grabbing a pawn is a big mistake. After queen e6, bishop c4, b5, black is winning, of course. So white would have to play bishop d3. Maybe this is what MVL missed, and he didn't notice that d5 pawn cannot be taken. And after queen e6, knight f3, knight d7, this position can be only absolutely slightly better for white, but still approximately equal. King f8, quite an interesting and creative choice from Vachier-Lagrave. g3. I would like more here to play the move knight f3. After g6, bishop d3, king g7, castles, rook d8, rook fe1, knight d7, rook a d1, and after typical play for black, which is move c5, bishop a6 guarantees white some small but stable edge. Okay, but Nakamura decided to develop his light squared bishop to g2. c6, bishop g2, g6. Here right now I would like, this is some kind of alpha 0 style move. This is move h5, just to trying to push that rook's pawn to the, for example, h3 or h4. But right now it doesn't work well. After move h4, knight a6, knight f3, knight c7, castles, Queen e7, rook fe1. Right now, this position is becoming very unpleasant for black because his king is stuck in the center still. Okay, so g6, this is of course a good move. Knight g2, and black finally achieved his artificial castling. Castles kingside from white. If white wants to play immediately in the center with move e4, then after d4, knight e4, queen d8, castles, knight a6, rook ac1, again he has some pleasant edge. So it was possible to strike immediately in the center. Instead, Nakamura simply castles, which is of course also fine, because after queen d8 we have the same line, e4. d4, knight e4, rook e8, rook a1, knight a6, knight 2, c3, knight c7. This is of course a big mistake, and I think that simply Vaclav didn't notice some motive. Should play, for example, rook b8. This looks quite strange to play such move, but it's of course quite obvious that right now this important bishop on b7 would be defended after a move like c5. After rook fe1, bishop c7, h4, b5. Black is ready to generate some counterplay. Right now white would have to play queen b3, because if queen c2, then b4, knight a4, ba3, ba3, and after bishop a5, passive black's bishop are becoming quite dangerous, and black generates some nice counterplay. But still after queen b3, it is not possible to play b4, so bishop a5, rook e3, and only right now b4. A b4, knight b4, h5, and still it is white who is on top. But definitely it was something much better than what played Vaclav. Of course, knight c5, it is not hard to notice such idea. bc5, dc5, knight d5. Of course, bishop c5. This is of course losing because white has too much material. After b4 he is simply winning. So black has to play knight d5, cd6, queen d6, knight e4. Just look at the bishops. Light squared bishop from white is simply strong, and the one on b7 is so bad. Queen e5, rook c1. It was also possible to try this quite surprising idea of the move f4. After queen c7, queen d4, black has to play f6, because if king g8, f5 and white's initiative is so powerful. So f6, but still after rook c1 there is a threat of taking on d5. So black has to play rook e7, and after rook fd1, again white has some strong pressure. Okay, but of course this is not that easy to open your king side in such manner with move f4, and rook c1 is still sufficient for some still edge. Knight b6, again it was a very bad move. After rook ad1, queen a7. Of course black has sacrificed some pawn, but after rook c6, bishop f5, he obtains some counterplay at least. Rook c7, and of course white is much better, but at least there are some counter chances for black. And still there can be some technical problems. So let's have a look at some other variation. If b4, white is in no hurry to grab this second pawn. f3, queen b2, and again it is black who has some counterplay. And still there will be some chances. Knight b6 is very passive, and it only helps white. Rook a d8, knight c5. This is some inaccuracy from Hikaru Nakamura. It was much more easy to play the move rook c to e1, with a deadly threat of playing knight d6. Bishop c8, then of course knight d6. And white is winning. And if, for example, rook f8, so right now there is no such motive. But after knight c5, queen c7, takes, rook e7, this position is horrible for black. So this was much more easy to play with that move, but knight c5 is still not that big mistake. Especially that Maxim Vaclav played rook d4. After bishop c8, bishop c6, rook f8, he could still make some resistance without pawn. Okay, rook d4, this is of course losing on the spot after queen c3. Too many pieces are hanging. And rook c1, this move simply ends this fight. Very well played by Hikaru Nakamura. Of course, Vaclav definitely misplayed this game. But still, I think that this is quite illustrative of possibilities from white in London system. Okay, so let's move on to the second game. This will be between Alexander Grischuk and Vishwanathan Anand, played in 2015 in Sinquefield Cup. Bishop f4, d5, e3, c5, and here Grischuk tried very creative idea, the move d c5. I prefer here with white pieces to play the move c3 with typical London system structure, but dc5 is very creative and certainly playable. Knight c6, bishop b5, queen a5, this is the first slip from Vishwanathan Anand. He should opt for the move e6. b4, this is not that easy to hold on with this extra pawn. c3, bishop d7, queen b3. If knight f3, then a b4, bishop c6, b6, and this is some kind of not a boom gambit with reversed colors. Of course, there are some slight differences. And after bc5, knight c3, this position is already better for black, so this is definitely not what white should go for. And here there's an interesting possibility. Both knight e4 and knight h5 gives black some nice counterplay. Rook a2, and still computer assesses this position as slightly better for white. I believe that there are many counter chances for black. So this was definitely better choice for black, better plan for black. Right now after knight c3, a6, bishop c6, bc6, knight f3. Right now the position is becoming quite difficult for black. If queen d4, then e6, b4, and again black has sufficient counter chances. If b5, then of course bishop c5, and after king e7, quite a strange looking move, but of course queens are going to be exchanged. Bishop d6 with equal chances in this endgame. But Grischuk spotted his chance and he played the move knight f3. Very natural move, but of course this is simply the best. e6. This was the move played in the game, but still after knight e4, this move, with that move of course, black should have some nice counter chances. After castling kingside, of course still I prefer white because he has some very good development and some good attacking chances. And if queen d4, then knight c3, if queen c5, then of course in such structures, definitely it is white who is better, because from a strategic point of view, this is better position for white. But black could take on c3, bc3, and f6, quite an unexpected resource, with a threat of playing e5. So let black play this move, and after that sacrifice knight g5, knight e6, knight a7. Computer thinks that this position is equal, and I believe him, but still I think that this is quite interesting to play. But definitely this was the best chance for black. Let's also have a look at the move queen c5, and of course knight e5, e6, and again, thanks to his very good development, it is white who is better. Knight a4, queen a7, c4 with initiative for white. Okay, Anand played the normal, I would say, move e6, castles, bishop d7. If bishop c5, then again this annoying move, knight d4. Queen b4, rook b1, of course knight c6, then queen b2, queen b7, b4. And as I mentioned, this is very annoying for black. Knight a4, castles, c4, with a very pleasant position and very good prospects for white. So bishop d7, a3. I think that right now it was the good moment to strike in the center with move e4. Grishchuk missed his chance. After bishop c5, again knight d2, of course, with a threat of knight b3. Bishop e7, knight b3, queen b6, if queen d8, then e5, and this is of course terrible for black. So queen b6, rook e1, castles, and white has simply very good play on dark squares, and this guarantees him some good edge. So this was the good moment to try the move e4. Instead a3. This is slightly worse move. Queen c5, knight a4, queen a7. If queen b5, then unexpected move d4 with very bad position for black. So queen a7 is better. c4, bishop e7, rook c1. Of course, also white could try here move b4 with a plan of closing the position with move d5. White has two knights and black has two bishops, so this is very logical to close the position. Rook a d8, knight e5, bishop e8, queen e2 with pressure for white. Instead, rook c1, rook c8, again very bad misplay from Anand. If c5, then cd5, knight d5, bishop g5 with a typical better structure for white, of course. And if castle, then cd5, knight d5, of course. Black cannot open the c file because after rook c7 he is losing. And after knight e5, again, this position is very good for white. So rook c8, this is the aim of taking cd5. It was also possible to close the position again with a move c5. After castle b4, we can see that black simply lost the tempo with this move from the rook from the a file. Knight b6, knight e4, knight d4, and this is again very fine position for white. Instead, Grishchuk is opening the position cd5, cd5, rook c8, bishop c8, queen d4. Quite an interesting decision, but I think that fully understandable to exchange the queens, so right now it is quite easy for white to invade on c file. e d4, bishop d7. If castles, then of course rook c1, and this doesn't change much. Bishop d7, knight b6. Bishop d8. Again, after castles, rook c1, and white is ready to invade on c-file. Knight e5 with very bad prospects for black. So knight d7, rook c1, f6. Of course, black finally has to castle or something just to do with his king, because it's already 20 move and still black is in the center with his king. And if a5, then rook c6. Definitely black lost too much time. a4, knight d3, and of course the pawn on a4 is very loose. Rook c6, king f7, rook a6, white simply grabbed a pawn. So as you can see, the opening strategy was absolutely victory for white. Bishop d2. Right now white could immediately push his pawns with move a4. After rook c8, a5, bishop d8, making some square for our king with move h4, and this is of course probably just a matter of technique to win such game, such position. g5, at least Anand is trying to gain some activity on king side, but of course it's too late. If rook c8, then bishop c3, e5, g3. We are of course not forced to take on e5. Rook b8, a4, of course, if d5 then knight c5 would be quite embarrassing. e4, bishop d4, takes, with very bad prospects again for black. Okay, so g5 was played in the game. h3, rook b8, bishop b4, rook b7, rook a8. Finally, also white's rook is gonna escape. King f1, knight c6, bishop c3, e5. Of course, black has to try something. If not, he's just gonna lose due to the queenside pawns. d5, d4, bishop b4, knight e5, takes, king e2, e4, and very well calculated from Grischuk, the move f3. This stops all of the activity from black. d3, of course, e3, king d3, and there is no chance to push that pawns. And king d2, ef3, rook f8, both pawns on f and d are gonna fall, and this is why Anand decided to resign. Of course, this is not too early, because black will have totally no counterplay, and this is quite easy to win with white pieces. Very well played from Alexander Grischuk. He absolutely outplayed his very strong opponent, and I think that this is a very nice game in London system. So the last game will be from Magnus Carlsen. His opponent was Anish Giri, and the game took place in 2016. This time it is gonna be d5. Again, we can react with a move bishop f4 to reach the London system. Bishop f5, Giri is trying to play some symmetrical structure, and Carlsen is trying some very modest move. This is move bishop d3. After c4, then black can take on b1, queen b1, and king d1. This is not a big issue for white, but he lost the right to castle because his king is pretty safe. This is some example of how the game could be played. Also, black lost his right to castle. Knight f3, takes, and this is, I would say, some kind of computer game, because computers quite often loses right to castle, and this is some kind of that position. CD4, knight d4, there is no move like e5 due to queen c5. So g6, king e2, king g7, rook ac1, with some small edge for white. This is of course some example line. Instead, as I mentioned, Carlsen chose to play a very modest move, bishop d3, queen d3, d6, knight d2, knight f6, knight gf3, bishop e7. I believe that black could try the move bishop d6 because to me the move bishop e7 looks slightly passive, but still this is not a big mistake. This is of course possible to play with the bishop to this square. Castles and h3. This is very much in Magnus Carlsen style, just some small improving moves. Knight bd7, a4, c5. Black could try the move a5, and after e4, d4 takes. This is obviously equal position, because the move like bishop d3, of course, on the fourth move doesn't guarantee any kind of advantage. c5, a5, and c4. I think that this is not the right decision to close the center. I believe more with move rook c8, rook c6, and of course there is no advantage to white. c4 is risky, but still computer thinks that this position is fine for black. But as I mentioned, it is simply too risky to close the center. Queen e2, b5, ab6, ab6, knight e5. This is the time when Magnus Carlsen is starting his play. Knight e5, if queen c8 then e4, rook d8, c3. This position is already slightly better for white, but still nothing terrible for black. There are many defensive resources. Instead, to me, the move knight e5 again looks slightly risky. d5, knight d7, queen g4, rook e8. After queen c7, knight f3, king h8, h4. This is a very pleasant position for white, and I would say that from psychological point of view, this is quite tough to play such position with black pieces. Rook a5, h5. White is simply continuing with his attack against the king. h6, of course, black has to stop this push of h-pawn. Knight d4, rook fa8. Rook a5 takes. Bishop g3. Rook a2, f4. Again with some very pleasant edge for white. But still this position was defendable for black, for sure. Okay, instead Jiri played the move rook e8, h4, and f5. Right now after ef6, bishop takes on f6 and the pawn on e6 is defended. If rook a1, then rook a1, bishop h4, bishop h6, g6, knight f3, rook a7, and there is some pressure against black. And I think that this sacrifice of a pawn is definitely some good idea. I think that this position is much more easy to play with white. So f5, queen h3. Of course, white doesn't want to take on f6. Rook a1, c3. This is of course not the best idea to play in that manner, but Jiri already has some panic and he just wants to create some sort of counterplay. bc3, queen c7, and c4. Of course, this is essential to close the c-file. Knight e5, of course this is a mistake. After dc4, still there would be many chances to create some counterplay. Queen g3, of course, just to attack this knight on e5. Bishop d6. After bishop f6, king h1, and white is ready to grab a knight with the move knight f3. cd5. Right now there was quite an unexpected move, c5. Of course, bc5 is the only move because taking with a queen of bishop loses the knight on e5. And rook a6. Rook d8, and of course rook d6. And I think that this position is very easy to play with white pieces. I think that this is almost winning position for white. Carlsen simply missed his chance and he just took on d5. ed5, knight b3. There is a very good square on d4 for white's knight. Queen c2, knight d4. Let's have a look at this position. Of course, despite that black has one pawn more, this position is very unpleasant for him because his pawn on f5, d5 and b6 are so loose. And of course, there is a very good edge for white right now. h5, queen d7, rook b1, bishop c7, f3. Very useful, of course. Magnus Carlsen doesn't need to rush. Queen f7, rook a1, simply going for this open file. Bishop d6, rook a6. Queen h5, at least Jiri is trying to grab some pawns. But of course, after rook b6, he is forced to give up his two pieces for the rook. Rook e3, bishop e5. Of course, from material point of view, this is not bad for black because he has two pawns and a rook for two minor pieces. But of course, his king is open, the pawns on d5 and f5 are so bad. And this is why this position is very easy to play with white. Queen f4, rook e1. King f2, rook a1. Queen d2, rook a8. This guarantees literally zero counterplay for black. Queen a6. After that move, of course, there will be still some resistance. Knight f5. Of course, this is not that hard to spot this possibility. Queen f5 and queen d5, and we are taking with a check on a8. So queen e6. There's of course no need to go for such line like queen d5 and knight e7. Carlsen simply wants to mate his opponent. g6, knight h6. King f8, knight g4. Just look how harmonious is position white. King e8, this king wants to escape. Knight f6. King f7. Knight h7, rook a4. Queen d8, rook a2. King g1, and there are simply too many threats, too many also mating threats, and this is why Anish Giri simply resigned in that position. I'm really impressed by the style of play in that game from Magnus Carlsen. I think this game reminds me something like AlphaZero play, especially this sacrifice and this push of h-pawn. Of course, AlphaZero in 2016 wasn't released yet because it was released in 2017, but it definitely reminds me something from that, and this is why this game impresses me even more. Okay, so this was chapter 1 with some illustrative games. In next chapters you are going to see some theory and also some practical games. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.